So we talked about red blood cells, and they are called erythrocytes, and those red blood cells contain hemoglobin. So when we're talking about the transport of oxygen, primarily that is done by binding to hemoglobin. So the significance thing about hemoglobin is it is our respiratory pigment. It is what causes our blood to be red. It has iron in it, which makes up the heme component of the hemoglobin, also is composed of protein. This is a respiratory pigment that can bind reversibly. And this is the interesting thing about hemoglobin is it changes its behavior depending upon where in the body it is. So it respiratory pigment that can bind reversibly with O2, an oxygen molecule. So hemoglobin can pick up oxygen and transport it, and then it can release it. So here we're picking it up and transporting it. Here, going the other direction, we're releasing it. So hemoglobin, this would be called oxyhemoglobin. This is deoxyhemoglobin. Anyway, so it picks it up in the lungs, for example, it takes it to your muscles and it drops it off. Now, when we talk about the hemoglobin, each molecule of hemoglobin can bind to 4 oxygen molecules. Now, this is what we call saturation of hemoglobin. So you have, or you probably have experienced somebody putting something on your finger. This is a pulse oximeter, measures your pulse, but it also measures your oxygen levels. And so what it's doing is it's trying to determine how oxygenated your blood is. And this has become very important because of COVID. And when you get really sick, sometimes your oxygen levels can drop dramatically really fast. And you might not realize how sick you are. And then you go in and you're like at 70 or 60% or even lower, then you know that you are in respiratory distress and that you need help. Okay, so when we look at these, this determines hemoglobin saturation. So I'm just going to write HB saturation levels. So we want our saturation to be up in the 90s, maybe even like 97, 98. You don't want it dropping lower than 90. So if we look at this, we can just look at the oxygen. Here, oxygen is being picked up by the water, so it's diffusing. Some of it, a small percentage of it, is actually dissolved in our plasma. Most of it goes into the erythrocytes, where it is bound to hemoglobin. And then it is dropped off. So hemoglobin disassociates from it and is dropped off in our tissues. So let's look at the transport of carbon dioxide, which is very different. So when we look at carbon dioxide, there's 3 ways that carbon dioxide is carried in the body. The first is it's dissolved in water. The second is that it is bound to hemoglobin, but not the same place that the oxygen binds. So it's bound to the globin, not the heme, in hemoglobin. And the most common way that it is carried in the body is as a bicarbonate ion. So carbon dioxide combines with water to produce, and I'll make this line go in both directions, carbonic acid. And then this carbonic acid can dissociate into hydrogen ions, plus this is my bicarbonate ion right here. So that's my bicarbonate ion. So when CO2 is dissolved in water, it produces carbonic acid. And this actually decreases pH. So it makes the blood more acidic. Then it dissociates into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. So this is my hydrogen ion. Okay, so let's look at this in our diagram. So as the percentages, 7% of CO2 is dissolved in water, 23 is bound to hemoglobin, and then most of it is carried as a bicarbonate ion. So we could put those percentages here. So this would be 7%, about 23%, and about 70%. Now, this relationship between CO2 and blood pH is actually the trigger that causes us to breathe more deeply. So if we retain oxygen, if we hold our breath, if we retain CO2, if we hold our breath, CO2 increases, this decreases our blood pH and it makes us want to breathe, right? So we breathe more forcefully and more deeply if our pH of our blood decreases. Now, if we look at another interesting thing about this, has to do with carbon monoxide poisoning. So let's just talk about this as an aside. This isn't normal, but carbon monoxide poisoning. CO. So it's only one carbon and one oxygen. It's not carbon dioxide, it's a monoxide. So carbon monoxide poisoning can be done or can occur if you don't have enough oxygen and you're burning fossil fuels. So if you bring a barbecue inside, or if you have an old furnace that is not completely combusting your natural gas, for example, you could get carbon monoxide. Now, carbon monoxide is an odorless gas. We cannot breathe it or we can't smell it. But you can get carbon monoxide detectors to put on in your house to detect if those levels are getting high. So the reason why carbon monoxide is so dangerous is it competes with oxygen for binding to hemoglobin. So it binds to the same place on the hemoglobin molecule. But it does not get released. So it does not bind reversibly. So it doesn't bind reversibly. It binds and then it sticks to it. And so people sometimes kill themselves by running their cars in an enclosed space like the garage, because that builds up carbon monoxide and it causes you to essentially just go to sleep and die from suffocation. The confusing thing about carbon monoxide poisoning is that when it binds to hemoglobin, it actually creates a pink coloration. So people who die from carbon monoxide poisoning actually look they don't look blue. It doesn't look like they have suffocated. They actually have like a pink color to them because of the carbon monoxide binding to all the hemoglobin so that oxygen cannot be transported in the body. And so that is what happens. These this is accidental or a way to cause death is through carbon monoxide poisoning.